Okay, this week in Maya, I want to model a simpler object in order to illustrate the kind of pipeline from creating a kind of lower poly model to then increasing the subdivisions and then the detail by sculpting, and then finally adding textures and being able to paint textures onto the model. So in order to do that, we're going to be kind of creating a form in Maya, cleaning it up, sending it to Mudbox, and then in Mudbox sculpting and then painting onto the model. And then maybe at the end of the lesson, I'll get into retypologizing a little bit because that's something that we're going to want to know when we're modeling characters. So I didn't get into it last week, but I wanted to demonstrate modeling using NURBS, curves and surfaces, to create a model. And so what I'll do in this video is I will create an object from curves, and then I will convert that to polygons. And then in the next video, I will retypologize, and I'll get into what that means a little bit more in the next video. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do, the object I've decided to make this week is a tube of paint. I think it should be simple enough, but also I'll be able to kind of demonstrate how I would maybe sculpt it to give it more of a kind of lifelike appearance as far as like being used or something. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here by drawing some curves. And I'm going to start at my top view here and just use my EP curve tool. And I'm also going to snap to grid just so that I can keep my model symmetrical. I'm going to go ahead and count out 4 here, and then I'm going to count out 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe 6, 7, and go in here, so 7, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and hit enter. And then I'm going to create one more curve here at 4 out and 7 up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1 in, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And let me go now to my perspective view, and I think that's a little wide. Let me go ahead and select both of these curves and shrink them into each other. And now let me go ahead and create some profile curves. And I'm going to start by working in my perspective view, because whenever I'm going to be creating surfaces from like 3 or 4 curves, I want to make sure those curves are intersecting. And so I'm going to actually use this 3-point circular arc. And I'm going to start by, instead of snapping to grid, I'm going to snap to curve here. And whenever I just place my click close to a curve, it's going to snap to that curve. So let me make sure I'm on the curve and bring it to the very end. And now let me go out to my front view here, and I'm going to click a point right here, and then go back to my perspective view and finish up my semicircle here. And it looks a little bit bigger, so let me see if I can move this. Let me go to my front view. And actually, that's a perfect semicircle. Let me bring this down a little bit. I think it is. It looks like it's a little bit off. If I bring this up, I'm sure I can kind of flatten it out. And now let me work on the kind of back of my tube. I think and I can at any time go in and kind of manipulate the shape of these curves by right-clicking and going to Control Vertex. And I want to pull this Control Vertex to the other side of this tube, or actually right on the tube, both of these. I think I prefer that. I know it's just a small detail, but you know, it's okay that these two aren't perfectly even. Nothing in life is perfectly symmetrical. So, okay, I think that looks fine. Now let me go and create another kind of curve on the other end. And this one's not going to be a 3-point arc. I'm just going to do another kind of EP curve. So here, here I'm going to, let me delete that. Go to my EP curve tool. And snap to curve is still on. And so let me drop a point out here. And now I'll go to my front view and maybe drop one here. And in this case, actually, I'm going to drop one right here. Just kind of eyeball it. And then go back to my perspective view and finish off this curve. What I'm going to do is actually draw all of the curves for this form, and then I'm going to go ahead and use the bi-rail tool to create surfaces. So let me go ahead and now in my perspective view create my bottom half of this curve. And I'll do a snap to grid again here, and I'll just, I think it was about here. And then I'll go back and do snap to curve. And there's the opening of my tube. It does look a little bit wider. If I go to control vertex here, I might go ahead and kind of smooth these in a little bit and start to just change this shape just a little so it looks more tube-like. And I'm going to go to the top one and do the same thing. Just select this set of curves, pull them in. This set of curves, pull that in a little bit. And I think that looks pretty good. Let me go ahead and do the back end of this. EP curve tool. And hit return. Okay, so now let me use the bi-rail tool to create these surfaces. So if I go up to surfaces and say bi-rail 2 tool and select the 2 profile curves, I'm going to select the top first, 1 and 2, and then it says select the 2 rail curves, so I'll just drag a marquee around these 2, and there's my top surface. And let me go ahead and do the bottom. And again, go to Surfaces bi-rail 2 tool and select 1 profile, 2 profiles, and then the 2 rail curves. And now I have my 2 surfaces. As we know, the kind of normal direction here is on the inside, so I'm going to just go up to surfaces and say reverse direction, and I'm going to do the same for the bottom here, reverse direction. And so now I have these 2 surfaces. I'm going to go ahead and select them, and I'm going to say attach. And just so we know what my, because I think I played around with this a little bit, I'm connecting them. I'm not blending them. I'm just connecting them. If I wanted to, let me go back and see what it would look like with blend. Oh, I did want to reverse the direction here. And let me go ahead and select these 2 and say blend instead and hit apply. And so all that does is it kind of it rounds over this edge, but because this is a NURBS patch, remember, we can go and kind of, it's one flat rectangular sheet, right? If we go to our channel box editor, maybe it'll, our attribute editor, and I'm not sure if I'm able to, oh, here we go. Let's see what some of these are. Blend is on, and I am not able to necessarily move this sweep here, but we know, let me turn off snap to curve, but we kind of know from our previous lesson, you get this kind of brighter or bolder line here, that this is one NURBS patch that's sweeping around it. So if I So it's kind of connecting it here. So I might want to maintain that kind of sharp point instead, and just instead of saying blend, I want to say attach. Let me delete my attached surface here going backwards, and I'm just going to one more time go up to attach, and I'm going to say connect. And I'm not going to keep the original, so I'm just going to hit apply. And it's going to make me again go to reverse the direction. Okay. And I don't know how much I love what it's doing here, but I think it should be fine. So now what I want to do is I want to make the end kind of caps to the tubes. So I'm going to go in and work in isoparms, and if I click right here on this curve, it highlights it in red and then yellow, and I unclick it, and now I can go up to curves and say duplicate surface curve, and now it's created a curve out of those two curves based off of the surface. I can do this anywhere along the surface. I can go to isoparm and start here and say, duplicate surface curve there, and it will create a curve from that part of that surface. Okay. I don't need to do that. So I have my curve down here, and now I'm just going to go up to surfaces and say planar, and that creates a planar trimmed patch. Let me get out of this, and also this. That creates a patch. If we remember, we'll go to hull here and we can see what that patch looks like. So this is just to give me a kind of indication of what my final form will look like, even though that's really not imperfect. And let me go up here and again go to isoparm and click on this outer curve here, and click, and then say curves, duplicate surface curves, and again go up to surfaces and say planar. And I'm going to have to, I think, reverse the direction on this one. Okay, there we go. So now we have something that looks like a tube of paint, or maybe a tube of toothpaste, not really sure. The last thing I want to do is to create my cap here. So I'm going to do that by doing a little revolve. So let me go to my top view, and I want to snap to grid here. Let me also turn on wireframe mode. And so I'm going to draw a kind of large cap that maintains a size to the grid, and then I'll shrink it down. So I'm going to go like that. And actually I'm an EP curve tool, but I want to do this in the Bezier curve tool. And so I'm going to just drop some, this way I can make a curve that has corners. And remember, if I'm thinking about the profile of this, I want this to kind of revolve around. I'm going to use the Revolve tool. And so I'm going to want to revolve around the z-axis in this case. And so I want this part of it to kind of complete itself. So I will end it right at the z-axis line. And so now I'm going to keep my curve selected, and I'm going to say surfaces revolve and hit the options box, and I think the default is set to Y. If I ever want to reset my settings, I can go to edit in any of my options menus, and I can say reset settings, so it'll bring me back to Maya's default. And so yeah, this Y axis is the default. I'm going to go ahead and hit Z and hit apply, and so now it's revolved that curve. And I think it's a little bit big, so let me go ahead and kind of shrink it down and also bring it out. And now, and I think, what mode am I in here? Oh, I'm okay. Just looked a little bit strange. The pivot looked a little weird. So let me go ahead and actually not snap to grid, but snap to point and hit the D key. And I'm going to pull this in to the middle point, or one of the middle points here. And then I will say snap to point again, and then pull this in. So now my object is all one object. And I think what I want to do actually is kind of scale? I don't know. I feel like maybe I should scale it down quite a bit more. And I also do want to center it. So let me go ahead and say modify center pivot. And what's nice about working at the origin of your grid is that I can just snap to grid and move it right into the center of my scene. Okay, so there's my tube of paint, a very simple object. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to select these different surfaces, and I'm going to say, I don't think that if I do these planers it's going to work, but let's go ahead and just select everything. And I'm going to go up to modify and say convert, and then NURBS to polygons. Let me now move this out, and it did. It worked fairly well, but actually here you can see that it doesn't really line up. And so the other thing we can see is that these are in tries. And so the mesh itself, and we have, they're in different, okay, so there are a couple different objects have been created. What I can do here is I can kind of delete these two instead, and since this is all one mesh, I can go up to mesh tools or mesh here and say fill hole, and that will cap these two ends. But you know, this is kind of funky. Like, this doesn't really make sense the way that it's kind of drawn out the typology automatically. Makes for some really strange kind of geometry here. And so the next thing I want to do, actually, and so you can see the difference between how smooth our curves look. It might not be a bad idea, actually, before I go ahead and I wonder what will happen if I actually add in some divisions here, if that will help with the typologizing. So let me say, go up to surfaces and insert isoparm. And I'm going to do another one here, isoparm, and pull one around here and say surfaces, insert isoparm. And now I wonder what happens when I, because now I'm giving it a little bit more information before I modify, convert NURBS to polygons. Let's see if that did a better job. And actually it did the exact same job. It didn't give it any more or less detail in. Rendered the surface exactly the same, so that didn't necessarily matter, but just wanted to at least try it. Okay, so I have, let me go ahead now and connect these two, and the way I'll do it actually is I'm going to pull this in a little bit, undo snap to grid, and pull this into the mesh, and I'm just going to do a Boolean. Union Boolean, and now I have one whole object. Okay, so this is my final curves to polygons object for now. In the next video, I'm going to retypologize. I'm going to change the kind of shape and direction of, I'm going to basically clean up completely the flow of edges and faces around this model.